Guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight, I'm going to be reacting to the Greco-Turkish War and Legislation of Ethnic Cleansing Between Two Wars, 1922, Part 2 of 2 by Time Ghost History. Yeah, I think this one is going to be a very heavy topic to discuss. Let's start. Three, two, one, go.
In 1922, the Greco-Turkish War ends and brings to a conclusion one of the most shocking series of reciprocal ethnic violence in modern times, well, until the Second World War. And it will set a standard of how to deal with ethnicity and ethnic
Before we continue, I forgot to say, if you want to check out my previous reactions, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Okay, let's continue. Sorry about that.
tensions that will have far-reaching and tragic consequences. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a summary of the interwar years, from the uncertainty and hedonism of the 1920s to humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. Today's episode is one that some will find controversial, but also essential to understand the events that led up to the Second World War. We do not assign blame to anyone here. That's not our job. Mankind's history is a complex web of events that is not easily drawn to a black and white conclusion. So, we've done our best to give as balanced a view as possible of the events in Greece and the Ottoman Empire at this time, based on the most reliable available facts. I'd also like to remind you here of our policy of a polite and fact-based conversation in our forums. We will block you immediately if you start any flame wars, use racial or xenophobic slurs, or use this platform to forward a political agenda.
Okay, if the disclaimer is that long, then you know this episode is going to be tough. It's going to be very emotional, very impactful. Yeah. Okay, I'm ready.
November 1st, 1922, the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire is abolished by the Turkish Republican government in Ankara under Mustafa Kemal Pasha, later Ataturk. Within days, the imperial government in Constantinople under Grand Vizier Ahmet Tevfik Pasha resigns, and the last Sultan, Mehmed VI, abdicates. The Ottoman Empire, that for 500 years has dominated the Eastern Mediterranean, the Balkans, much of the Black Sea, and large parts of Arabia and the Middle East, has officially ceased to exist. Just 100 years earlier, the dominions of the Ottoman Sultan stretched from Belgrade in the north to Khartoum in the south, and from Tunis.
What? Wow. Okay. Wow.
In the west to Baku on the Caspian Sea in the east. Now, although we might see it as a Muslim empire, this is far from the truth. The empire is an ethnically, culturally, and religiously diverse construct with a population of Christians, Jews, Muslims, and many smaller religions living side by side.
Okay, so yes, as Indian Nidell says that, socially the people were very mixed in terms of their religions and backgrounds, yes, but the face of government, the face of the representatives of government, those people, I think they were, specifically Muslims or maybe even Christians, I'm not sure, or even Jewish people, I'm not entirely sure, but I think maybe they were mainly just Muslim orientated practicing people, if I'm not mistaken. If I am mistaken, correct me in the comment section below. But I think that's how they presented themselves, and maybe that's why most of us, such as myself, have that perception to say that the Ottoman Empire, the face of government were mainly those who practiced the Islamic faith. So yeah.
The language of government is Turkish, but the subjects speak 50 or more different languages and come from dozens of different ethnic backgrounds. And all the way until the end of the empire, These religions, ethnicities, and language groups cannot be divided along clear geographic lines. This is especially true for the heartland of the empire that straddles the Aegean Sea and runs along the Bosporus into the Black Sea. In 2018, these regions are parts of Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria.
We know what happens when people start cutting up land and saying that now this is a brand new country. We know what happens when that happens, you know. All of a sudden, you're not part of that group that is considered to be the true people of this nation. Now you're being classified as others. You're classified as unwanted people, and, you know, death and destruction follow suit to when there's this form of nationalistic zeal that now bursts into creation. So yeah, I'm really worried where this is going. But I think even the title was a dead giveaway, you know, legislation of ethnic cleansing. So
here was Constantinople, the capital of the empire, but here was also its greatest diversity. When ethnic nationalism starts pulling the empire apart, this will be the stage for a great tragedy that comes to its dramatic conclusion in 1922 and 1923 as the Convention Concerning the Exchange of Greek and Turkish Populations, for short the Lausanne Convention, forces 2 million people to leave their ancestral lands to live in a foreign place where many of them neither speak the language nor know the customs. Those forced to leave are in some ways the lucky ones though, because they have survived a massive effort from Turkish and Greek nationalists to create ethnically pure nation states, which between 1919 and 1922 has led to the murder of hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of men, women, and children by both sides. As ethnic identity evolves in the 19th century, the Ottomans have already lost a lot of land to the Russian Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Although these conflicts might have played out with an overtone of religious agitation, it was not truly about identity until around then. That starts in the Balkans, with uprisings in what is today Serbia in the first decades of the 1800s. The unrest in the Balkans continues until the Russo-Turkish War in 1877 and 1878, when the Ottomans are defeated by the Russian Empire, fighting alongside nationalists from Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro, who now gain some independence. Half a century before that, though, in 1821, Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians in the Danubian provinces and the Peloponnese rise up against the Ottomans. There has been a growing movement of ethnic Greek or Hellenic nationalism for a few years by then, and based on a rather liberal interpretation of how ancient Greece is connected to the modern Greek-speaking world, the idea, the megali idea, develops that the Orthodox Greeks have a historical claim to all the western parts of the empire around the Aegean Sea, Constantinople included.
we have been here before with other nations. Do you guys remember Poland? Do you remember, no, was it Poland or was it Lithuania? I think it was Poland. They tried to unite with Lithuania and some parts of Western Ukraine to recreate that commonwealth that existed hundreds of years ago, you know, and it failed. And here we go again with another country now proclaiming themselves from the past, saying that, you know, we need to reclaim the past ancient empire that once lived. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Just like with the previous episode with Mussolini, you know, with his ambitions of recreating that Italy of old or the Rome of old. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. But yeah, people with their dreams, they'll be the death of us.
After years of rebellion and civil war, they finally get help from France, Britain, and Russia and declare an independent kingdom, but without mighty Constantinople. Greek independence is recognized by the Ottomans in 1832. The Ottomans have not given up on their imperial aspirations. In the second half of the 19th century, a new idea, Pan-Turanianism, develops, a dream of uniting all Turkic peoples from the Mediterranean to India, from the Arab Peninsula to the Balkans. Now, Despite being essentially secular themselves, the Ottoman leaders conclude that the ethnic conflicts threatening their empire are along religious divisions between Muslims and Christians. So their solution is to make the Ottoman Empire essentially Muslim after all. By the late 19th century, Christians in the empire see their rights eroded and face increasing suppression by the state. Whether or not all this intellectual activity by people in power with vested interests in identity politics is justified or not is pretty immaterial for the people living in the affected regions. They just live there, right next to each other. And although they might belong to different cultural backgrounds, their families have been living there for generations. The inclusion of all these lands in one empire has also led to even more regional cultural diversity as people resettle within the empire. Add to this that over generations, some families have changed language or changed religion so that you now have a whole bunch of Turkish-speaking Christians and Greek-speaking Muslims. So when the Greek kingdom is created, it is inevitable that there will be people suddenly living inside of Greece that don't fit what the nationalists define as Greek, which is Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians. Likewise, many people that do fit that definition now live outside of Greece. The Ottoman 1914 census confirms that it's close to 2 million, a little more than 10% of the Ottoman population, though it could be as many as 2.5. In Constantinople, 30% of the people are mainly Greek-speaking. This large minority of Greek speakers is the biggest language group in the growing mercantile middle class. Again, according to the Ottoman 1914 census, they contribute 50% of invested industrial capital. Out of 18,063 trading houses, 15% are Turkish-speaking, 23% have Armenian-speaking owners, and 46% are owned by Greek speakers. They own 49% of the 6,507 industries and crafts companies, and they are the biggest group of educated professionals, making up 46% of all bankers, 52% of all doctors, 49% of all pharmacists, 52% of all architects, 37% of all engineers, and 29% of all lawyers. And to be clear,
in the end, all of that didn't matter, really. You know, if people want their identity politics to be supreme, they will crush whatever opposition, whatever organization that, you know, speaks against their ambitions of creating this pure ethnic state following a specific religion. And you must look a certain type of person to be considered as, you know, part of the country. So it wouldn't matter, really. Many countries have destroyed themselves in the pursuit of having their pure ethnic race represented. So it's sad.
we know from countless recorded testaments by these people themselves, they do not think of themselves as Greek. They feel Ottoman or Turkish. So much so that when the Young Turk Revolution to establish a constitutional democracy breaks out in 1908, the Greek-speaking middle class is supportive, even as the Young Turks are calling for an ethnic Turkish state. But why shouldn't they be supportive? They live in Turkey, they've lived there for generations, so they're Turkish, right? Well, the Young Turks don't see it that way. They want a Turkish-speaking, Muslim culture bourgeoisie. After the revolution, non-Turkish speaking, non-Muslim minorities face even more oppression and suppression. Many of the minorities then also gravitate towards their own ethnic nationalism and carry out violent attacks on Turkish ethnic nationalists. The three pashas, who basically ruled the Ottoman Empire during the World War, with Minister of War Enver Pasha at the forefront, are supporters of Pan-Turanianism. And during the 19-teens, they institute a program of systematic ethnic cleansing, forced labor, death marches, and starvation against all mainly Christian ethnicities, which also includes the Greek-speaking peoples. This grows into a popular movement as agitation against Christians drives neighbor against neighbor. Whole villages are emptied of their inhabitants. Families are robbed of their possessions and livelihood. Men, women, and children are tortured, raped, and murdered. The cruelty escalates during the World War when it develops into real genocide. The number of casualties is contested.
I'm trying to look for the right word here, but you know, the genocides we just don't know about. I should say it like that. these are one of the genocides we just don't know about. We know about the famous ones from what happened with the Jews in Germany, what happened in Rwanda. We know about those ones. Like, there's even movies on them. So many movies on these genocides that happen. But this genocide, we don't know anything about it. Honestly, I've never heard of it. It's the first time right now with Indian Idol. And I'm sure there's many other genocides across the world that happened that we just don't know anything about. Yeah, it's just terrible.
That between 2.5 and 4.5 million members of the various Christian minorities will be killed between 1908 and 1922. Mostly Armenians, but between 350 and 750,000 are of Greek ethnicity. The area with the largest Greek-speaking population is Western Anatolia and Eastern Thrace, or Rumelia, including the area of Constantinople. Anatolia is also where hundreds of thousands of Muslim Circassians and Turks have fled to the Caucasus and the Balkans during the recent white and red Russian ethnic cleansing programs and the Balkan Wars a decade ago. In any case, ever since the rise of Hellenic nationalism in the early 1800s, it has been the goal of the Greek nationalists to make all of Thrace and Western Anatolia part of Greece. With the Ottoman Empire on the side of the Central Powers in the war, the Kingdom of Greece eventually sides with the Entente. As soon as the war is over, and already before there is any peace treaty, Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos convinces the Allies both that it's time to punish the Ottomans and that the Greek-speaking peoples inside the empire must urgently be rescued. Now, that second thing is underscored by the clearly visible refugee crisis, since hundreds of thousands of the Ottoman Greek-speaking population have already fled the ethnic violence to Greece, right? With British and French support, Greek forces land in Smyrna on May 15, 1919. The port city still has a Greek-speaking majority and a surviving Armenian population who greet the Greeks as liberators, supporting them to quickly take control of the city. In other parts of the empire, irregular forces of Greek ethnic nationalists begin forming to carry out attacks against the Ottoman army. The Greek army establishes a zone of control along the Mediterranean from Smyrna in the south to Ayvalik in the north, stretching a few hundred kilometers inland. To the north, the British control the coastline along the Sea of Marmara, and the Greeks have occupied eastern Thrace, west of the Bosporus, while Constantinople remains under autonomous control of the Ottomans. The Greek army now violently subjugates the Muslim population in their zone of control. Thousands are killed and tens of thousands of Muslim families are forced to flee further into Anatolia.
The cycle of hatred continues to churn. It churns and churns with violence upon violence. We just don't learn, do we?
The Greek army then systematically plunders the Muslim citizenry. The soldiers collect their contraband and openly sell it in the local bazaars. They also plunder state institutions, banks, businesses, and factories, dismantling entire manufacturing operations with tools, machinery, and even parts of the buildings ferried off back to Greece. In Smyrna alone, just the cash and postage stamps they steal from the city vaults is valued at 17,332,962 gold lira, which in 2018 would be more than $4.8 billion. And that's only a
postage stamps? Really? Postage stamps? Oh, okay.
fraction of the total value plundered. All government functions cease, so schools close, hospitals operate on volunteers, pensions, salaries can't be paid, and the region descends into chaos. The Ottomans are in no position to put up any serious resistance. One man will take it upon himself to change the situation. He is Mustafa Kemal, the national hero of Gallipoli in service in the Ottoman army. Now, at this point, he has not yet gathered an alternative government and proclaimed a Turkish nation. 2 weeks before the Greek army invaded Anatolia, he started a tour of the remainder of the Ottoman army to assess their readiness after defeat in the World War. He's frustrated with the handling of the Greek invasion and the way the Paris Peace Conference has gone. In July, he defects from the army to gather a political and military force to oppose the Allied occupation and the Greek invaders. The Ottoman government issues a warrant for his arrest and then condemns him to death in absentia. But with his immense popularity, and as the general situation continues to deteriorate, the government is in no position to take any real action against him. By autumn 1919, he has formalized his national cause under the Association for the Defense of the Rights of Anatolia and Rumelia. In the elections of December 1919, they win a huge majority in parliament. Now, Kemal advocates a modern, liberal, democratic Turkish nation-state, much smaller than the Pan-Turanian vision. Nevertheless, it still embodies the idea of an ethnic-based nation-state. So, despite not being a vehement anti-Christian himself, he attracts huge support from some of the worst perpetrators of the genocides against Christians. But Kemal still remains dedicated to a Turkish liberal state with equal rights for minorities. In January 1920, his supporters in parliament pushed through the adoption of the National Oath, a 6-point list of demands that more or less go directly against the Treaty of Sèvres, the post-war peace treaty still not signed or enacted. The oath says that several of the territories that would be given up under the treaty shall instead decide their fate by referendum, including those with large Greek-speaking populations. It demands autonomy over trade and maritime border control, and it asserts the independence and autonomy of the Turkish state. It also includes a promise of equal rights for minorities on condition that the same is guaranteed for Muslim minorities in Turkey's neighboring states. Instead of negotiating with Kemal's faction, though, the Entente powers occupy Constantinople March 16 and demand that Parliament ratify the treaty. Kemal promptly calls for the dissolution of Parliament and new elections for a government with a seat in Ankara instead. On April 23, 1920, Kemal's new parliament, the Grand National Assembly, holds its founding session in Ankara. They are not the internationally recognized government, though, so the Entente powers force the signature of the Treaty of Sèvres with the government in Constantinople in July, and it goes into effect August 20th. Eastern Thrace goes to Greece, but the area around Smyrna, now controlled by Greece, shall remain under Greek control, but in Ottoman sovereignty until a plebiscite decides its fate 5 years from now. The Greek government is only semi-satisfied with the situation in Smyrna and Anatolia, and during the summer of 1920, they expand their zone of control hundreds of kilometers inland. But although they're facing a weakened enemy, as their front gets stretched, they need to pour more and more troops into the region. But this brings problems on the home front. Venizelos defeated the royalists and forced King Constantine I into exile during the Great Schism before the World War. The royalists were opposed to an entry in that war and are opposed to the expansionist policies of Venizelos. The current king, Constantine's son Alexander, is, however, in favor of expansion, but now that war of expansion is forcing an already ailing Greek economy to the brink of bankruptcy, which even the massive plunder in Anatolia cannot offset. So the two face renewed opposition.
Okay, so much information to process there. But yeah, the Greeks, I also did not know they had royalty, just like the Italians. I did not know they had royalty. I'm wondering what happened to them. Did they also become extinct as a monarchy? Or do they still exist? I think I'll have to search that on the internet as well. And yeah, the pillaging that's been happening in the Ottoman Empire by the Greeks, I mean, really, they were just dismantling infrastructure. There wasn't really anything of value, much. They were just dismantling infrastructure and shipping it back home. That could be bricks, that could be scaffoldings, that could be iron casts, just normal infrastructure building material, but nothing of value in terms of like gold or jewels or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know what kind of spoils of war did they think they were going to get from the Ottoman Empire, really. I mean, this is not the times of ancient Greece where the spoils of war were really valuable, in terms of food, in terms of the resources that people excavated on the land. Many of those things that the Ottoman people had, the Greeks already had it, because of industrialization. that's been occurring across the world. So really, I just don't see what would they be gaining from doing something like this, from invading Anatolia and capturing almost all of this land and thinking that the Greek economy will survive on them pillaging that land. It's just not going to work. But anyways.
On October 25th, Alexander suddenly dies of sepsis after being viciously bitten by a Barbary monkey while interceding in a fight between his German shepherd and one of the pet monkeys in the palace gardens.
Wow. Wow. That's like a story like, I don't know, like, you know, like in Game of Thrones with the king. What was his name again? I forgot the king's name. King Baratheon, I think. He was hunting and he got attacked by a boar pig, I think, or boar. Yeah, he was mauled by a pig, and he got infected, and then he died from his infection. So this is something similar, where this king was trying to break up a fight between his dog and a monkey, and now he got bit by the dog or by the monkey, and he got infected, and now he's dead. That's just so strange.
On November 1st, Venizelos' faction is defeated in the national elections and the royalists win a majority. They demand a return of Constantine as king, and in a plebiscite on November 22nd, 99% vote for his reinstatement as monarch. Now, the Entente powers are not at all happy about seeing their old opponent back on the throne, and in protest, they freeze all further payments of loans to the Greek government, which worsens the Greek economy further. Then, the new French government decides that the whole affair in Anatolia is a proxy war that only serves British interests, so their support starts wavering. But though the royalists might be against the new war, Greece is committed, and suddenly leaving it could sabotage the Treaty of Sèvres and would be a public relations disaster if they did not follow their proclaimed mission of saving the Ottoman Greeks, so they continue fighting. Meanwhile, Kemal has found new allies in Bolshevik Russia, who, in an effort to expand their interest westward, supply him with arms and equipment. With an initial delivery of 6,000 new rifles, over 5 million rifle cartridges, and 17,600 shells, as well as 200 kilos of gold bullion, Kemal is ready to strike back. In January 1921, he starts his counteroffensive at the First Battle of Inonu. The Greek army puts up a solid fight, though, and under the direct command of King Constantine, launch its own counteroffensive towards Ankara. During the spring and summer, they make steady advances, but on September 13th, they're halted some 40 kilometers from Ankara at the Battle of Sakarya, also Sangarios. The Greek army is now exhausted, overstretched, and bankrupt when France withdraws from the war and adopts a pro-Kemal stance on October 20th, 1921. This cuts the Greeks off from vital supplies and opens up their flanks. The Greek front collapses and Kemal's forces start driving them back towards the coast.
Politicians, you know, they're your friends today, then they're your enemies tomorrow, and then they're your friends again, and then finally they just cut you off, leaving you high and dry. It kind of reminds me of what's happening right now with Ukraine and Russia. You know, Ukraine thought that they had allies in Europe, that, you know, they would be there to defend them from Russia should anything happen. They were their friends, and then when the heat started rising up in the kitchen, the European Union were like, you know what, we are not in this thing. We're not in this situation. You know, we're a defensive pact. We only protect our own members. What happens in Ukraine, we sympathize with you. We give you our words of support, but it's not our issue.
During their retreat, the Greeks wreak havoc on the Anatolian Muslim community. They burn, pillage, rape, and murder their way through a population already suffering the consequences of the war. Fearing reprisals by the Turkish pursuers, the Greek-speaking inhabitants of the region flee alongside the retreating Greek army. The path of retreat becomes a line of absolute destruction. According to the International Commission that assesses the damage immediately after this war, they flatten 141,874 residential, commercial, government, public, and religious buildings. They slaughter, steal, or disperse 3,519,559 farm animals. Add that to their pillaging on the way into Anatolia, and you see that this region is by now completely barren and destitute. The lost animals will actually turn out to have the worst effect on the population, since it robs them of their basic food and clothing source, and it will take several years to breed the animal stock back to a sustainable level. The most tragic part is, of course, the scores and scores of civilians that die directly or indirectly here at the hands of the Greek army. For this, we do not have any 100% reliable numbers. The best estimate is the one that is accepted during the conference in Lausanne. By that number, 1.5 million Muslims are displaced or killed during the war, out of which 640,000 are dead. By comparing the census numbers, you can verify this number pretty well. From 1914 to 1922, Muslims in Western Anatolia decreased by 1.2 million, which corresponds pretty well to the total estimate of 1.5 million in both Eastern Thrace and Western Anatolia. The Turkish army continues to drive the Greek one back to the sea, and at the Battle of Dumlu Pınar in August 1922, most of the Greek army is destroyed. The remaining forces retreat in chaos towards Smyrna, still destroying everything and murdering Muslims in their path. On September 8th, the Turkish army takes Smyrna, and they now begin their reprisals. It is unclear how many civilians die in the aftermath of the war, but by numbers that emerge later, it is clear that it's significantly more than 100,000.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
That is actually the highest estimate for one single event alone, the Great Fire of Smyrna that breaks out on September 13th, while Turkish forces are ravaging the Greek quarters of Smyrna, plundering, raping, and slaughtering those who have not been able to flee. If the fire is set on purpose, or if its collateral damage from the reprisals is unclear. To the tens of thousands that perish in the flames, it doesn't really matter either way, as they die a painful, horrible death. These events shock even the World War-hardened Entente powers. Already in the spring of 1922, they realize the Treaty of Sèvres needs to be revised, but they're too slow to react, perhaps powerless, and maybe unwilling to stop the carnage. On October 11th, 1922, an armistice is signed at Mudanya and enters into immediate effect. To find a permanent solution to the conflict and a peace plan, the conference is called in Lausanne, right? And preliminary talks start November 22nd. This is why Kemal chose to dissolve the empire in early November, so that there would be only one government to deal with, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. The conference will lead to the Treaty of Lausanne in July 1923, which replaces the Treaty of Sèvres just as Kemal wanted. This treaty will not only settle the peace between Greece and Turkey, it will recognize Turkey as a nation state among equals, a full member of the League of Nations. It cancels the cessation of land in Thrace and Anatolia to Greece, but Turkey also rescinds all claims to the Dodecanese Islands, Cyprus, as well as any in North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the rest of the Middle East, such as Mosul, which contains the oil fields of the British. It cancels reparations for the Great War and puts Turkey in a position as if it were a new country and not a continuation of the Ottoman Empire, quite unlike the situation that the successor states to the other imperial central powers face. It restricts the borders of neighboring Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania. All in all, it's a win for Turkey, but one that has come at a high price. On the path of negotiations, the issue of ethnic purity of Turkey and Greece is resolved under the Convention Concerning the Exchange of Greek and Turkish Populations. On Turkey's demand, this agreement does not deal with language ethnicity primarily, but religious affiliations. It's agreed that all Turkish-speaking Muslims living in Greece shall be forcibly removed to Turkey, and all Greek-speaking Christians in Turkey shall be forcibly removed to Greece. Those still alive and living in their homes out of the 2.5 million individuals that this concerns are not asked how they feel about it. For the Greek-speaking...
When are they ever asked how they feel about it? When are they ever asked? Civilians have no participation in the boardroom politics and smoke-filled rooms of their supposed leaders. You know, just like I said before, a nation can just pop into existence and you won't know about it. You'll just be visited by a government official, and then you're told that you are now part of this nation, or you are no longer part of our brand new nation. You gotta leave because you're not Muslim, or you're not Christian, or you're not Greek, or you're not Turk. You know, it's like games. Like they're just playing games with people's lives here. But yeah, we continue.
Christians in question, somewhat academic. Most of them have either already fled to Greece or they're dead. Out of the roughly 2 million Greek-speaking Christians that lived in the empire in 1914, it turns out there are only 189,916 still in Turkey. They are removed to Greece. And although Greek speakers in Constantinople are exempt from the convention, 50,000 of them leave on their own volition. Most of the 300...
I would do so as well. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you could say Constantinople is your home and everything, and you can't see yourself leaving. Look, just leave. Just leave. The government of Turkey is going to be very adamant on trying to create this ethnic Islamic state, you know. So rather just leave. Don't stay and fight and have your family being killed and you being killed and everything being destroyed. Just, I know it's painful, but you have no choice on the matter, you know. The boardroom politics decided your fate without your consent.
155,635 Turkish-speaking Muslims in Greece that are forced to move to Turkey do not actually want to go, but they have no choice. So you might think, okay, problem solved. Everybody goes to their side and we've got peace. Well, not for the people who have been moved or who fled. Identity is a subtle thing that has a lot to do with your immediate surroundings and relations. Just because you are Muslim or Christian does not mean that you're the same as every Muslim or every Christian. They now end up in a country that is not familiar, where they are not wanted. The Greeks from Turkey are called Turksiid, face constant harassment, even murder. The Turks that had just been Greeks arrive in a much more Muslim state than their homeland, bringing their Western habits and customs. They get treated as infidels and face similar experiences as their counterparts in Greece. To this day, in 2018, the families of those forcefully removed complain of racist, xenophobic treatment even after 4 generations in their new land. For Turkey, this was all a huge political win, but a financial loss, as many of their most productive contributors to the economy are forcefully expelled. For Greece, it's a humiliating military loss, but an economic win, as the new arrivals will help create an economic upswing despite being undesirables. For the world, it sets an example that will have far-ranging consequences, and I cannot emphasize enough. If you take only one thing away from this episode, it should be the following. As Professor of European History Robert Gerwarth puts it, the outcome had a significance that went well beyond the Greek and Turkish context to which it ostensibly applied. The convention effectively established the legal right of state governments to expel large parts of their citizens on the grounds of otherness. It fatally undermined cultural, ethnic, and religious plurality as an ideal to which to aspire, and a reality with which, for all their contestations, most people in the European land empires had dealt with fairly well for centuries. In the next 2 decades, this practice, set by this convention, will become the central contention between nations, ethnicities, and nationalities that sets the stage for a second world war and the death of at least 56 million people.
You know, it really hits hard, even when Mr. Indian Idol doesn't say cheers anymore to us. He doesn't raise his glass of, I don't know what's in there, wine maybe, or whiskey, and drinks it up, and then he's like, see you next time. He didn't say that. He just looked at us. That just shows how painful this episode is how serious this situation has become and how it evolved into the catastrophe of World War II, 56 million people. That's the total amount of people in my nation, I think, in South Africa. I think we are around 50 something million or maybe 60 million by now. I'm not sure about the latest census, but imagine my entire nation of people dead in World War II. And before that, during the times of the Greco-Turkish War, so many people died just because of their ethnicity or because of the God that they pray to, It's the same things we've been fighting over for generations. It's just that in that time period, in 1922, everything is so automated now in terms of killing people, You're not killing people now close contact, with a blade and a sword or a shield or riding on horseback. You're shooting people down, mowing them down with automatic rifles and gallet guns and artillery fire and aircraft. I would say that was the start of humanity becoming a bit more desensitized to war, because it's no longer becoming personal. You're not being splattered with your enemy's blood. You're not hearing the screams sometimes. Like, the enemy can be far away and you can just shoot at them with your missiles, with your artillery fire, with your heavy caliber guns, and you wouldn't hear much of them. You just hear the loud noise and ringing noise of your weapons as they destroy an entire village of people, And killing has just become that fast now. So fast. Your brain can't even comprehend it. You just move on to the next target. You kill them as well. You move on to the next one. You kill them as well. And really, it's just... There are no words, really. There are just no words that I can say. All I know is that humanity hasn't learned from that time. Really, we haven't learned. We're still doing the same mistakes, the same ethnic cleansing legislation. Like what happened with Myanmar in terms of the Buddhist central government chasing away the Muslim-speaking and Muslim culturally ethnic people from the country over to Bangladesh and into no man's land between Bangladesh and Myanmar. We've just had that. We just saw that happening, And now we're having another war here again in 2022 between Ukraine and Russia. Proxy wars. People not acknowledging that, they are the ones who further instigated this situation turning into a catastrophe for Ukraine and for Russia. People goading others, saying that we will be there for you if Russia attacks you. You will join the European Union soon. You'll become one of us soon. And then you have on the other side the Russians telling them, guys, this is the red line. You cross this red line, you're in trouble. And no one is going to defend you. Politicians coming up with amazing stories, telling each other amazing stories, telling the public amazing stories, and they just play with words until war starts, and then they don't know what to say anymore. They keep quiet. They stay away. They say, this is not our issue. This is not our problem. Just like with what happened with the Greco-Turkish war. The British, the French, they all left because of their own political ideologies and their own political schemings between those two nations. How they would play with the lives of so many in the Greco-Turkish war. And also with the Greeks wanting to unify this old empire of old, the ancient Greek Empire. Like, guys, we just don't learn. We just don't learn, really. If there's one thing that I've realized as well, is that, you know, with time, humans forget. We always forget. We always repeat the same cycle of violence upon one another. If it's due to race, our cultures, our ethnicities, our religions, we just continue to churn that cycle. I should also add in resources, you know, oil or any other form of resource. We fight amongst each other for these 5 things. And it just never changes. We make new laws, we make new resolutions in the United Nations, but we still go back to our violent selves when it suits us. Yeah, this was a very emotional episode from Time Ghost History. Yeah, guys, if you like the video, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I'll see you next week. Okay?